You're listening to Cottontail's podcast, part of the Silicon Valley Black Project, which produced the documentary film A Place at the Table about the Black pioneers of Silicon Valley. A Place at the Table can be viewed for rent on Vimeo.com on demand / A Place at the Table STEM. Through Cottontail's podcast, the Silicon Valley Black Project will continue to recognize the contributions made by African Americans. We will be featuring African American professionals, technologists in the fields of engineering, administration, and entrepreneurial pursuits from the past and present. Today we're talking to Milt Winfrey, a former materials manager and entrepreneur based in Silicon Valley. Milt has traveled the globe working for IBM and for a startup manufacturing company later purchased by Seagate. His work ethic and willingness to learn afforded him a front-line view of the workings of manufacturing in the U.S. and the Far East. I think you have one of those, what do they call it? One of those stories that kind of evolves and kind of gives people examples of how you can come from nowhere and be somewhere, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's, and I think we all can say that one. We can all lay claim to that.
I think all of us that came up in the era that we came up in experienced that same type of relationship. You know, our parents didn't have, like my dad was a janitor. Okay, I mean he did his own, had his own business, but he was cleaning offices and cleaning stores, like clothing stores and so forth. And so my first job was with him.
Yeah.
You know, and there was 4 boys in the family, so as each one got old enough, we were out there doing the same thing that he was doing. And he shined shoes during the day, and he cleaned offices at night. So that was how he supported a family of 8, you know.
And isn't that a miracle? Can you look back and you say, how did those people, and they did that, you know, they were making below what we would even call minimum wage.
Right.
And still, I don't remember ever thinking until I was almost grown that I was poor, you know?
Yeah, we were never without.
And the other thing, it taught me, if you want something, then you got to be willing to work for it.
Right.
And so what you didn't matter what kind of work you were doing, as long as you did it well, you should be proud of the fact you earned this money.
Though it really kind of depends on how you carry yourself, how people see you. I came from a small town in Missouri, Lebanon, Missouri, so in essence, I guess you could say my dad was an entrepreneur because he had his own business. You know, he shined shoes during the day and he janitored at night, and you know, that was so he really wasn't answering to anybody other than to himself and what you know, he had to do to support his family. So yeah.
Well, I think most of the jobs that Black folks had prior to probably the 60s were their own little businesses, own little enterprises. We're doing hair, you know, we're shining shoes, we're making clothes for people, we're cleaning houses. And we didn't get Social Security. You know, they wrote that Social Security law that said no domestic could be included. So if we got sick, we didn't make money, you know. So we were little entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and my mom, that's what she did. She did the domestic work.
Yeah.
You know, during the day, she was working for she had you know, 4 or 5 different clients that she worked for based on the days of the week, you know. So she would go to that house and to this house, you know, clean, and then she had to come home and do it again, you know. We didn't get it done, you know.
Had you finished high school when you got to Stockton, or?
Oh yes, when I finished high school, initially I had gone to and enrolled the summer after high school at Southwest Missouri State College in Springfield, Missouri, and uh, I got a job working for the summer at the college doing maintenance work, you know. So I worked the whole summer.
Mm-hmm.
And then in August, my uncle, who lived in Missouri also, but they made their annual trip to California, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and to see the family. So he asked my mom and dad whether or not I would help him drive to California.
Oh.
And so they said yes. And so I went to my boss at the school and asked him if I could have 2 weeks to drive my uncle and his family, help him drive to California. So that's how I got to California. So I came out here. I met some really good guys. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we had a lot of fun. They showed me such a good time in those 2 weeks that I was here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not even just meeting me, but knowing the family and our families that lived here knew them, their family. So you know, we just really got together real quickly, and I stayed here 2 weeks. I talked to my uncle who owned the Richfield service station on Main Street, and he told me that the schools in California were free, and I was working, you know, to pay my way through college back in Missouri if I were to. And so I went back and I asked him whether or not I could come to California and live with him and go to school.
Mm-hmm.
He said yes. So when I drove back home, I asked my mom and dad, you know, look, I can go to California and go to school for free, and you guys don't have to pay, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, my Uncle Quentin, my mother's brother, said it was okay. Mm-hmm. I could come live with him, work at his station. And that's what I did. So they called him and talked with him and asked him, did he actually say this and if it was okay? And he said yes. And a week later, I was on Greyhound coming back to California, and I've been here ever since.
What year was that, Milt?
1958. That was 17 when I came out here myself. So, yeah.
So you were out of Missouri.
I was out of Missouri, yeah.
And it wasn't it wonderful to have the free schools? I mean, it wasn't necessarily free because our parents were paying taxes and whatnot.
And you had to buy your books.
You had to buy your books.
Things like that. But it wasn't like you were paying tuition.
Right.
And, you know, back there, I would have been paying tuition. So I would have continued to work at the college as long as I could have to help pay for my own, you know, my schooling, you know.
Right.
At the state, yeah.
And, you know, I don't remember any of us complaining about that. What we were doing was planning on how we're going to get it done. You know, we didn't say it was right or wrong. We just said that's the way the world is, and we went about our business. So, you know, I was hoping, too, that we could talk about the history of Stockton and some of the things that went on there and how it shaped you going forward in your life. How do you think Stockton helped you to become who you are?
Well, my first 2 years, I stayed with my uncle while I went to school, but I was only there 1 year. From August through June, I stayed with him and went to school. But I felt it too confining for me. And I had a little cousin that was 4 years old, and I had to stay in the bedroom with him, and he was a little pest at the time. He turned out to be a great guy, but at that time, so I said, hey, you know, look, I had met some other friends. Their parent had agreed to let me come live with them, and so I did. I left my uncle, and I went over there and stayed with them, and they lived by Stribley Park.
Yes.
Just so happens I was still working for my uncle at the service station, even though I wasn't living there with him. And one day I met a friend of mine that I knew from Springfield in Missouri. He drove up in his car to get gas. And I was washing the windows and putting gas in his car. And I looked in and I recognized him. So we got to talking. And it just so happened that his grandmother, lived 2 blocks over from the service station. And so he was just coming down. And he lived in San Francisco because he and his mother had gotten married and moved the family to San Francisco. And so that's kind of how that went. And then, so we got together. Then I decided to go to San Francisco. So I went to San Francisco and worked in San Francisco, various jobs, waiter, moving furniture and doing various jobs, just to stay afloat. And I did that, for about 6 or 8 months in San Francisco. And then I came back to Stockton, and I went to work for Stockton State Hospital.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was my first real job in Stockton. And it was a good job. I became a psychiatric technician. It was a good, and I worked there 5 years before I left then and transferred that job to Agnew State Hospital in San Jose. And that's how I got to San Jose.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But Stockton was a good place. I met a lot of friends in Stockton who I still am friends with today. And so I think just being around those folks, and they turned out to be progressive people as well. And it just made you want to continue to move forward in your life.
Right.
And as I said, a lot of the guys were going to San Joaquin Delta, the college. So they were into the college mode, of bettering themselves through education. And so that was a good thing for me. So it was a good starting point. And then I got married in Stockton. I met this beautiful young girl named Sherilyn McGill. And I just, that was more than I could take, so I had to marry. So we got married, and then, like I said, in 1965, I moved up to San Jose. And in February of 1966, I went to work for IBM. She had seen something in the paper that IBM was hiring. And not knowing what IBM really was all about, but I knew it was a technology company, and they were looking for accountants. So my degree was in accounting, from Delta, and so I got that job. Started there as a timekeeper, and after a few months or about a year maybe, I went into cost accounting. I became a cost accountant. I did that for a while, and as I was continually beginning to move, I became manager of payroll. And I had responsibility for the Western region. In Colorado, IBM had a plant, and it was large, just like San Jose. And we was responsible for paying those people every week, because we were at that time paying weekly, and paying San Jose, and there was a card plant in Campbell, California, so we had to pay them as well. So that was a good job. I went from there to become, after leaving the payroll manager's job, I went and became a staff accountant. So, which was another step up. A staff accountant within IBM. And I went into financial planning there. Okay. So I did financial planning until about 1980. In 1980, I took a leave of absence. Okay. And I took a leave of absence because when I started the job at IBM, the pay was only about $350 a month. So, I had my little, trying to figure out, well, how am I going to, but it was still better than the state hospital because they were only paying $300 a month.
Right.
So, and I knew that I had an opportunity there that I could, could move up. So, but I had started a little tax business on the side. I took a little tax class and I started doing taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And I, working at IBM, there were a lot of folks there. We became friends. They started asking me to do the taxes, and that got to be a pretty good little business.
Mm-hmm.
I had that business from 1980. As I said, I took a year's leave of absence in 1980 because it had started to grow, and I thought, well, maybe this is what I can do,
mm-hmm.
and as my own business. For the first 6 to 7 months of that year, 1980, it worked good because I had a lot of customers. I picked up some new customers, but in the last 5 months of the year, when the tax season was over,
yeah,
I could not, and I did not have a follow-on business to take me through those 5 months.
Yeah.
Okay, I had an office that I was paying rent on, and so forth, and I was able to get a little bit of bookkeeping, a little bit of tax people coming in wanting to do some analysis on something that they might have been doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was getting a little bit of money, which
Yeah.
helped me pay some of the things, but everything was falling on my wife in terms of the expenses, because she was working at Lockheed.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the year, I decided I would go back to work at IBM. But I still continued to keep my business, my tax business.
Mm-hmm.
And it still continued to grow. And in 1989, 1983 actually, 83 and 84, IBM started making small disk drive disks for the computers. And they wanted to start a business unit to focus on just that small business, because prior to that, San Jose was only making these big machines with huge disk drives and so forth. And then the computer came along and they needed to get into that business. So they set up a business unit of consisted of about 12 people. And they made a guy by the name of Bill Allman a vice president to oversee that unit. And it was his job to staff that business unit. I was in financial planning at the time, and I was picked to go work in that business unit as the financial and the materials guy. So that's what I did. I was reporting to a guy that was a director who reported to him, to the vice president. So we had all of the business responsibilities in San Jose, but the manufacturing responsibilities was in Japan. So my job was to go to Japan, work with the guys there in terms of finding out the financial, ramifications of the manufacturing and so forth. We had manufacturing in one town, and we had the development in another town in Japan. And so there was a lot of travel for me back and forth to Japan and here. So that lasted about 3 years, and we were able to develop the disk drive to the point where they were able to manufacture, turn it into a manufacturable product. And then they dissolved the business unit, and I went back to working as a financial planner, staff financial planner for IBM until 1989. In 1989, the same person who was the vice president in this business unit uh, was selected to be COO of a new startup, which was Connor Peripherals. And Connor Peripherals, which was started by Finest Connor, who was one of the founders with Al Shugart of Seagate Technology.
Oh.
Okay, so Seagate was making a 5.25-inch disk drive, which was the same size that we had developed within IBM back in the 83, 84 time frame. And they had become a big player in that business, 5.25-inch business, selling to IBM and other manufacturers of the computer. Then at that point, Bill Allman, the guy who now was going to be the CEO of Connor Peripherals, came and asked the guys who had worked for him in his business unit to come work for him in this new startup. And that was how I left IBM in 1989 and went to work for Connor Peripherals.
Now, was Connor a spin-off from IBM or a completely different industry?
It was a completely, well, it was actually, you could say it was probably a spin-off from Seagate.
Seagate, okay.
Finest Connor was a founder, one of the founders of Seagate.
Okay.
But in my understanding, there was some problems within Seagate because Finest wanted to start making this smaller 2.5-inch drive rather than the 5.25. And apparently he and the other founder didn't see eye to eye on that. So he took his money and left Seagate and started his own company with his name, Connor Peripherals.
I see.
And so we started making the 2.5-inch drive, and it was a real success. As a matter of fact, if you go back and look, Connor Peripherals has a distinction of being the fastest company to reach $1 billion at that time in the Silicon Valley.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and it took us about 3 years to get to that point. And so, that was by 1993. And then in 1995, Seagate, who had then started making the 2.5-inch as well, okay, and they were a larger company to begin with, but they were able to buy out Connor.
Okay.
So the job that I had with Connor as a materials manager at that point when I came to them as a materials manager, then Seagate had that same position. And so, you know who was left out?
Oh, yeah.
I was left out. That person that was already at Seagate with the same position that I had was put in charge of the materials. But we were still making the disk drive. The guy who had been the lead person, he gave me a job as a materials manager of substrates, which was the disk that goes into the computer. So that was from 95 to 2000, I did that job. And we had manufacturing in Singapore when I was with Connor. So my job took me to Singapore, to Penang, okay, Malaysia. So because we had manufacturing plants in those areas, building the disk drive, but they all needed the substrate, which was the shiny disk to go inside their disk drives. So that was it turned out to be a pretty good job, very demanding. We had a problem because we were doing 1 million or so per day. If you had a problem, then I had other manufacturers of the disc that I would bring in um, when we'd have a problem with our disc, and I'd have to go out and buy from another vendor in order to supplant that. So, yeah, it was interesting. Interesting. I stayed in that job until I retired in October 2000.
Well, here is something I'm hearing here, a person who had to interface with people of all different kinds of culture, not just culture, but literally a whole country, a whole nation behind them that's completely different than what you came from. You had to plan for an industry that you could not have possibly have known you'd ever be in, and you had to negotiate between all of this. So here's this little guy from Missouri. Did you have any determined ideas about who the Japanese and the Singaporeans were before you went over there?
Well, not really, because they were in the U.S. Like there were a lot of Japanese people that, because of IBM being the size that it was, they were coming here all the time anyway for one reason or another. And so you would interface with them. Same thing when I went to Connor and had to deal with the Singaporeans. They were coming to the U.S. We would have meetings and so forth. We would have video conferences, meetings, usually once or twice a week. We would be on a video conference with them in a conference room. And so you got to know the people prior to even going over there. And so when you went there, they were so receptive and welcoming that it was very easy to be there and not feel isolated, because normally I was the only one of our the only black person in the room. In most, even when I was in Japan or when I was working with Connor, they didn't have a lot of black managers. And so in most cases I would be the only one.
But you would be the knowledgeable one in the room. Yes. And so that's what they were right, relating right. to.
That would be why I was there. And so they would kind of cater to me, they would, because they would want to know what it is that we ought to be doing, the reasons for my being there.
How did you manage to obtain the skills to do all of those things, Milt?
Okay, well, one of the things that in the years that I was with IBM, one of the things that IBM did do for us, they sent us to school for many different disciplines. So I gained a lot of knowledge working at IBM and the schoolings that they sent me to, whether it was back in Connecticut or, wherever, because we had IBM headquarters were back in New York, but we had all of these other plants around the country. And whenever, like when I became payroll manager, I had to go back to Connecticut and be trained how to, manage people, how to manage my unit, what I was responsible for, and so forth. And so you learn zero-based budgeting, you learn various other stuff that helps me as I went into these other areas. You're continually learning, and you never stop learning.
Okay. Well, considering that you're learning, what did you learn from your family members that allowed you or gave you that ability to accept the learning that you were going through and the training you were going through? Did
Yeah,
anyone,
well,
if was anyone that was your like a model, a role model for you and your family?
my sister, my oldest sister, went to Lincoln University
Mm.
in Jefferson City, Missouri. She graduated there. Um, my oldest brother had also gone there, although he didn't graduate because he went into the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom and dad always pushed us to be better, to do, you know, to get our education, to do what we needed to do to progress, Um, and I think that's the kind of thing that um, kind of spurred us on. It was just always, you know, our religious background because they were both religious.
Mm-hmm.
Dad was a deacon. My mom was, a mother of the church. And so they pushed us all the time to be better, and we tried to live up to that.
You know, now we have television, we have radio, we have podcasts, we have all these videos going on, and none of it reflects those kinds of values for
Right,
our community. Our
right,
community is they were what the
right,
people you just described. They were going to college. They had aspirations. They were starting their own little businesses. As insignificant as they may seem to others, they were very significant for us. And
yes.
your uncle owning a gas station in
Mhm.
that meant so much to us. That was an example of where we could go. So I was going to ask you too. You had to interact or interface with people in Singapore, and I can't remember the other country you named.
The Singaporeans are a little different than the Japanese, but it's not so different. They're all speaking English, so that we didn't have an English barrier, our language barrier, so that was made it easy.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite interesting. Yeah, I mean, I never had a feeling of being isolated, even though I was.
Yes. On a certain level, but see, if you're the man and you've got the information, isolation has to be set aside because they have to get to the information. So
Right,
yeah.
right.
And
And I think that's what made it um, so good that I didn't feel that there was a problem. And I've always been um, proud. I take a lot of pride when I used to, Black Enterprise magazine. I used to subscribe to that, and now I see it on online.
mm-hmm.
But to see all of the Black people that are starting their own businesses and doing things that other people think that we're not doing, it's very uplifting to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always looking forward to that monthly magazine so I could see these new things, these new people that are doing things that is pushing us forward.
Yeah.
Because the only thing we see on TV is the negatives. Very seldom are we seeing a lot of positive images of what we are all about.
Exactly.
And, you know,
I think a
so
lot of it has to do with their entertainment. They want to entertain people, but at what cost?
yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. And we need to continue to be entrepreneurs. And I see that in the women that are coming out of college and are beginning to do great things, starting their own businesses, and
Mm-hmm.
and it really warms my heart to see that. And I am hopeful that our young males will also begin to emulate them, even though I'm not saying that there aren't some doing that,
Yeah.
okay? But I
Yeah.
think we should have more that are thinking in those terms.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, I've been in a couple of organizations that we were trying to promote that.
Mm-hmm.
John Hill, Rose Crowder, uh, Queen Cannon,
Mm-hmm.
Queen Anne Cannon, Diane Green,
Mm-hmm.
and Tanya Young, we were on the board that started the Urban League
Yes.
in San Jose in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And John and I would be going to HP, various other places, corporations, and asking for donations and getting donations.
Mm-hmm.
And over a period of time, we were able to um, get enough monies in our banks that we were able to hire a full-time person to come be the director
Right.
of United Negro College Fund. Um, that was one of the things that I think I felt very proud of being a part of. And that was one of the things that I feel like you have to give back by doing those things that it helps promote the people that of each generation.
Right.
I was in my time with Connor, I began working with United Negro College Fund,
Mm-hmm.
and I was on the advisory board of the Western Region United Negro College Fund, who was out of San Francisco, and Jim Mayo was vice president for the United College Fund of the Western Region. And so as a part of that group, there was Wilbur Jackson was on that board,
Mm-hmm.
and Ed Clausell was on that board from San Jose. And we started in San Jose the chefs for UNCF.
Oh yeah.
That was a dinner that was put on, and we had at least 100 volunteers, that men and women that had volunteered to cook their favorite family recipes and serve those recipes, and we would hold it at the major hotels downtown San Jose.
Mm-hmm.
Every year. It was an annual event. Brought a lot of money in from corporate sponsors and so forth, because they would buy tables, and there was monies that we would donate back to UNCF. So that was something that I was a part of, actually, until I moved from San Jose to Sacramento in 2003.
Mm-hmm. The story has always been that it's the larger community that keeps our charitable organizations alive. No one mentions the Links, no one mentions the Boule, the 100 Black Men, and the chefs. That those organizations are at least 50 to 60, maybe some of them 100 in terms of the Boule and the Link. Years old, and they have always focused on the Black community with scholarships. They do all kinds of charitable acts within the Black community, and no one talks about them. They act as if we had nothing. We had that structure there. Most of us who rose above our conditions looked back always and tried to bring somebody or some groups along with us and give them a chance to live a better life. We realized we didn't get there by ourselves, and we also realized that nobody else could get us, the rest of us, there unless we turned around and helped them too. And that's what I saw you doing, particularly with your tax business, and also the way you and Cheryl opened your home to communities and friends, and everyone always felt welcome there. And even though no matter how high you went in corporations, you were still Milt. You didn't behave or change your behavior towards others. You've always been very open and friendly and, helpful to anyone who needed help from you. So you can just pat yourself on the back for that one. Okay. Now, Milt, did you ever finish a 4-year degree or was
No,
this?
I never did. I never finished a 4-year degree.
Yeah.
I did attend some classes at San Jose State afterwards when I moved after moving to San Jose, but I never got a 4-year degree.
Okay.
But IBM gave me my 4-year degree.
Right.
And many, seminars and things that I had to, in order to be able to continue to be on top of my game within the corporation.
But do you feel that not having it was a detriment to you, or did it really matter after a while?
Well, I think it could have been a detriment. I think when you have that 4-year degree, it makes those that are looking for people that they want to move up, it gives you another step up on the ladder for them to see that you have a 4-year degree, knowing that your analytical abilities and things that you've developed over that, during that 4-year period is something that they think they can build on. And so, I think it probably did have some effect on my career, but the way it happened, leaving IBM and going to a startup that really wasn't looking necessarily for the 4-year degree. They were looking for people that could get the job done.
Right.
And that was what I was able to do when I went there. So.
Thank you, Milt, for sharing your story with us. Your life and career took place at a time when Silicon Valley grew its own and promised employment for a lifetime. You are an example of an individual overcoming barriers and opening doors for others to enter the world of IBM and Seagate. Thank you, Milt, and thank you for listening.